residential workers as well as other departmental professional workers. And we acknowledge that that's meeting a minimum threshold but needs to be enhanced, and we have a new training program that we're seeking endorsement for that will cover off the areas of child sexual abuse and complex sexualised behaviours for staff and clients. I think we do very well in the area of training, supporting internal staff for external tertiary qualifications. So we have a relationship with Charles Darwin University. So we pay for and support vocational graduate certificates, which allows a worker over a 12-month period to be commissioned with that certificate, and that will then allow, if they'd like to go on and get a social work degree, that they would only have 12 months left to receive that degree. We also support regularly certificate 3s and 4s for staff, so we will pay for and provide the opportunity for the pathways and time and roster appropriately so that we can cover off that requirement.
What is it that you think now you should be doing better?
So after listening yesterday and reviewing some of the documents, I think certainly I recognise that we need to build resilience in the young people. A key message for me yesterday was you could possibly provide all the training in the world, but this is a particularly vulnerable cohort of children. And often, and not disagreeing with what you just said, often when they leave these environments, being so vulnerable, if we don't provide a level of tools for their toolkit to understand how to be resilient and to note people taking advantage of them, you're sort of up against it. I think we need to certainly train staff to have a relationship that's deep enough to encourage the disclosures, so not surface discussions and surface relationships, but deeper and more meaningful relationships. I think we need to recognise that training shouldn't just be, talking at people, but rather a parting of information, and we need to be sophisticated about that. And in 2015, we should look for multiple opportunities to engage young people through, and I'm not very IT savvy, so I'll give this a go, through apps and other things that they do, Facebook, and I've never been on Facebook, but I believe Twitter and other things that would allow them to want to take up those opportunities. And I think we as government need to recognise that's where we're going and invest in that sphere. I think we need to do much better with our partner agencies, so that would be the health department, police, education, child protection, youth justice, in that really coordinated and joined up approach. So these children are being seen by multiple persons. We need to have the same language. I found a couple of years ago we were teaching protective behaviours, and then as an example education had a different model of protective behaviours. When we're all interfacing with the children, we need to have the same language, and I think it's reasonable to expect that government should really invest in that multidisciplinary intensive case management model so that we are sharing that information and intersecting with these young people in a really meaningful way. I also think that our remote communities is a really significant issue in the Northern Territory. We have a remote communities workforce. We have some staff based in these communities. Not enough. We have the provision to have more staff base, but it's been challenging to recruit. But we need to meaningfully reflect on that workforce and how we can upskill that cohort to provide the support to our kinship carers in particular. We recognise that the training we would provide to kinship carers might not be the same as the training we would provide to professional carers, but there should certainly be opportunities to expose them to the models of training in those locations and to provide on-the-ground support from our Aboriginal workforce out there in an attempt to stabilise and maintain and give every opportunity to that placement type.
Ms Jackson, you say that the training might not be the same. It just isn't, is it?
Well, we don't offer a different training so far.
Well, you say that it might not be the same as the training we would provide to professional carers. It isn't the same, is it?
No, to generalist carers, not professional carers.
It's
not that it's not the same, it's that we don't offer the training in our remote locations.
I'm just reading the transcript, Ms Jackson. We recognise that the training we would provide to kinship carers might not be the same as the training we would provide to professional carers. You just don't provide the same training.
No, we don't.
Thank you. Now, in relation to the remote communities, you've indicated the difficulties. What solutions are you looking at?
So to ensure that the workforce that we have in those locations is rigorous, supporting.
To ensure that the children in out-of-home care in those locations are safer.
Yes, but putting the effort into enhancing the workforce that we have out there because it would be new to expand their role to include kinship carers. So that's the new part of what their role would be, and making sure that because we need to recognise in most of our communities you're talking about English as a third, fourth or fifth language, so there's a lot of investment there about any of the resources being appropriate. And I think there is still an element of shame, I don't know if that's the right word for kinship carers. We haven't promoted or supported the promotion of providing kinship care is actually a wonderful thing to do. It's not a default role whereby a child protection agency is sort of forcing that, but getting people in the community to stand up and recognise that it's a good thing to do and how we would support you to do that.
How do you do that in remote communities?
Well, I think there's an element of responsibility for child protection agencies to do a level of community education. So in Aboriginal communities, there's often the welfare connotation with child protection, and I think we owe it to ourselves and communities to promote that. Yes, in some instances we do remove children because there is a statutory obligation to do so, but there's another part of our work too, which is looking for people who would like to open their hearts and homes, promoting what that opportunity would look and feel like, and supporting people to do that really well.
And how are you actually doing that at the moment?
We don't do that at the moment.
You don't do it at all?
I think we have an ad hoc approach to that with the staff that we have out there, but what we're moving into with the support work that I talked about before is really formalising that.
Thank you. Ms. Worth?
If I think about the whole system in terms of the system, the structures and the people, I think the people area is the area that we are both doing well and need to do more investment in.
So, sorry, in relation to the people area, do you mean the staff?
Yeah, so the people area in particular mean the caseworkers. And I think the evidence for that is that often we rely on some of the tools and rules that we might have developed in our systems, and that we overlook what children tell us, which is it is a trusted adult. That makes a difference for them to be able to both disclose about what's happening for them, or tell us about their worries generally, not necessarily about being abused, but things that worry them and make them feel unsafe in their placements.
What is it about the measures that you have that allows you to say that you do very well with these people?
It isn't so much about, one of the things that we focused on since about 2012 is really trying to equip our caseworkers to be able to build better relationships with both the families they work in terms of child protection, the children in those families, and also the children in out-of-home care where we're their caseworkers, and the carers in that system. And that's based on internationally.
How do you know it works?
So the first thing that we did was to have Eileen Munro from the UK to do a review about our work there. And we found that our staff were much more comfortable in talking directly to carers and in children in language that they understood about how best to support them, a difference about what they know and what they do. And I think for us in the professional world, the gap between what we know and what we do is the gap that we're seeking to close. So a focus on caseworkers' ability to be able to work directly with children and directly with carers and to build trusting relationships with them was one of the things that our organisation is really focused on. A little bit similar to what Victoria's talking about as well in terms of case carrying, so less about sitting at the computer, more about in the family home actually coaching carers and coaching families when it's a child protection environment to be able to do that work. Our evidence for what's working, we currently have an evaluation around that. So one is about it keeping children safe in terms of less re-reports of abuse occurring in the home, so reducing the incidence of abuse in the home, and more also about in terms of the care situation of us being much closer to having a relationship with the child, so the child's likely to tell us or indeed to find somebody else in their system, in their family network, that they feel comfortable with. And this area of work, I think all of us would say in the child protection out of home care work is possibly something that we've overlooked while we've been really focusing on getting the systems right. That work's very important, but now we do need to swing the pendulum back to be able to utilise our staff, whether they're in the non-government agencies or in the government agencies, to work directly with children. We can't do that remotely. If you're going to build a trusting relationship with a child, you need to be with them, you need to know how to talk with them, and you need to be able to help them manage their behaviours, because often that's what the children are trying to tell us, that they have difficulties with emotional regulation and they need assistance in that, and they need to be able to have a trusted worker who's able to help them with that.
Just in terms of the evaluation, I'm not sure what precisely is being evaluated.
It's a number of things, and we're happy to. We've got an interim evaluation report, happy to provide that to the Commission about how, and I'm particularly talking about practice first in that case, but that's generally a way that we are doing relationship-based casework. The final thing I do want to say is something about workers being able to critique their own work and critique their colleagues' work. And I think one of the things that we haven't paid enough attention to in this area is our ability to, as caseworkers, to remain curious about our own work and open to other interpretations. So the group supervision that we found in our practice, and I understand in some other non-government agencies that use it, enables workers to be able to critique their colleagues' work and to put a different point of view. And that is really important in this work because of the way that we have, when we do reviews, we find that lots of workers might have had concerns about another worker's approach with a particular case, but didn't feel capable of raising that at the time. It's a big lesson from us from many of the reviews we've done in the 80s and 90s.
Could I ask a question? Those listening to this may be a bit surprised by one element of this. That is the recognition today of the importance of relationships in the out-of-home care area. Report after report in the early 2000s indicated that that was in fact the most essential element to the well-being of children in care. Indeed, there was a report in New South Wales called Voices of Children in Care, which identified exactly that the children themselves recognised the most important element for their well-being were relationships. Both Victoria, all of you have indicated relationships are important. It would be helpful to understand why it is that the systems up until more recent times have failed to be able to develop a relationship-based system of care when in fact it has been known for a long time that that is the central element. It affects relationships in terms of being able to disclose, it affects stability in placements, it affects a whole range of issues. And as many of you have said, trusted relationships is at the core of the out-of-home care system. So I was wondering whether we could have just some explanation as to why today in 2015 we only seem to be now really developing a new focus back on relationships when it has been well known that it has been central to the well-being of kids. And there's a number of initiatives that you've mentioned, and I'll come back to those in just a sec, but could somebody or others enlighten us to why we are in the situation we are now?
I'll kick off anyway. I think your first point of principle is absolutely correct. The relationship between the worker and a child has been well established since the Maria Cole investigations in the 70s. What has happened in recent years, and I heard my colleague mention Eileen Munro, who has led a very strong rearguard action in regard to the fact that whilst intuitively and professionally and personally people know that building a relationship, which is time sensitive, time critical and timely, has not been facilitated by a structure which has been designed very often to make agencies safe. So we've had many inquiries, institutional inquiries, we've had inquests, we've had reviews and we've had reforms. Eileen Munro's work has, I think, has sought to dismantle the fact that what we've created is a situation or an architecture for service delivery where the 80-20 rule has been reversed. The 80-20 rule is that workers should be spending 80% of their time with their clients and 20% of their time undertaking the administrative and support functions associated with that role. The research, and a very strong research base, is that that has been inverted. Through nobody's fault. It has been a design, over-engineered and over-proceduralised process whereby workers spend more and more time driving desks than actually visiting and seeing children. And one of the questions that your colleague asked about what keeps people awake at night, what keeps me awake at night, is what we're not seeing. And one of the reasons is not that people prefer to be sitting behind desks and prefer to be filling out forms, but they simply are not facilitated in order to engage in that relationship-based practice. So the knowledge is there, the desire and the will is there very often, the intent is there, but we have an over-engineered system which has created its own paradox, whereby in trying to seek to be compliant with all of the instructions and requirements and procedures and policies, that workers are inadvertently now spending more time engaging in that element of the work and less time in building a relationship, which takes time. It is a time-consuming principle of our practice. And unless we start inverting that pyramid or inverting that, then we will continue to struggle to engage our workers in the things that they intuitively know they need to do. And the voices of the child in that space are loud and clear. The voices in the theory are loud and clear, but we have created an architecture which I believe prevents workers from engaging in that in a purposeful and meaningful way.
And I think on top of that, I agree with all of that. So for me, there is, when you keep having reforms or reviews, you do build up an element of a distrustful workforce, because often, without the intention, what comes out of that is staff somehow didn't follow a policy or a procedure or are somehow at risk. And it's a highly mobile workforce, social workers. There are opportunities to work amongst all of the human services domains that we've mentioned. There's lots of vicarious trauma in this role, and I don't know the other jurisdictions, but I've certainly worked in two, and on occasion in the two jurisdictions I've worked for, you can be up to 40% deficit with staffing numbers. If people aren't invested or there for long enough, well, you can't build a relationship that's meaningful. So I think you've got these competing elements, and we have to, I haven't got that fancy language, but we have to reverse it to the point that people want to reinvest in these roles and have an opportunity to reinvest in the relationship component, not being stuck with the admin component.
Therefore, the reforms that have been identified by Ms Hare in Victoria, which is effectively to create a practice stream where people are concentrated on the practice of dealing with children and carers, as distinct from moving to supervisory or management role, is a significant structural change. I was wondering, the evidence for that would be light at the moment because it's relatively new, as I understand it.
Yes, Commissioner, we've had a an evaluation of the first 12 months of the new model, which found that it has been successful in large part in achieving its goals. However, you are correct, it's only been in place since 2012, so it's early days, and it is, as my colleagues have said, workforce change is a big undertaking.
And I was just reading about New South Wales, where the problem has been even greater with staff turnover within the agency, whether that issue, which is at the heart of creating stable relationships, is being addressed.
So we focused on building a practice stream by first of all establishing an Office of Senior Practitioner. We have a group of casework practice specialists. We publish the good practice work we do, so we tell those stories around here, what matters about changing the culture, that what matters is the work you do in the field, not necessarily the data and things like that. Not saying that obviously you do need the evidence as close to the practitioners as possible so that it's useful, not something that sits over there. The other question, though, about you do need, of course, people who are open and prepared to work constantly in that work. So we don't actually have a particularly high turnover of our staff. It's less than 7%. So that's that's certainly doable. One of the things, though, that I do think it would be if we didn't address the issue of how agencies in this area carry risk, because the issue of this is risky business, and in order to manage the risk, we tend to proceduralise, and that is good in terms of lifting the standards, so screening, those kinds of things are good so that we improve our standards. But we have swung the pendulum back so much in proceduralisation that we think that we can proceduralise risk out of here. And we've found that group supervision is a much better way for people to talk openly about risk and to allow the whole group to carry the risk rather than children, or indeed in this case carers, carrying the risk that sits with child protection or out-of-home care, which is exactly what you've said earlier, Robert, about unless you allow children, unless you hear their voice, they end up carrying the risk rather than the agency.
So that risk management and risk identification, risk management, and therefore ultimately risk allocation, which attends to at a price in terms of contracted service delivery, is that now a well understood issue within the departments generally? That in fact, as you rightfully say, out-of-home care together with all child protection is high risk. Are we in a better place today than we have been previously in understanding the risk, in identifying how to manage it, how to allocate it, and ultimately how to price it once you start to move down into a contracted service delivery system?
I think the first thing about risk is we need to be clear about I think we're not necessarily clear about children coming into care and that we don't do enough work there. Have we got the right children in care? Have we done absolutely everything with this family to ensure that they're able to provide permanency and safety for this child before bringing them in? And that's an area I don't know necessarily inside child protection systems that we are really, that's the area I think we need to go after, if you like. Once we're satisfied that there is no way that we've done as much as we can and there is no way this child can remain safely in that home, then I think the work that we do with children and their carers in out-of-home care starts to look a little different once we're absolutely certain we've got the right children in care. We've today spoken a lot about foster care and in this inquiry. We in New South Wales, we're moving to the point we think this should be the least preferred option for children in terms of their long-term permanency, their safety needs, that there needs to be much more work in terms of kin, guardianship, adoption if needs be, if there is no other way to give permanency to a child's life, and then foster care. So we think there needs to be greater discussion in that area.
Could also say, please, an extension to that, which, without stating a position, because I don't really have a genuine strong position on this, is the sense I think we all have about the importance of reunification opportunities. Now, if you believe in the philosophy of reunification, potentially at all costs, to have a child back with their biological parents, it tends to develop a system where children are bouncing around the system, going from their biological family into emergency crisis care, potentially residential, find a next of kin, the next of kin doesn't work, you find a foster care,
Sure.
a reunification happens and the cycle continues on. So a question I'm asking in my own jurisdiction is, to what extent do we support reunification? Is it a time frame? Is it so many attempts of success? Is it an age consideration of the child for the greatest outcome and the best opportunities for the child for the rest of their life? So this whole philosophical aspect of how many times you attempt reunification, I think, is also an aspect, looking at it from the child's perspective, is that disallows the opportunity of building these trusting relationships with potential care workers and case workers, because one minute you have the case, the next minute you don't. The case might come back again, it might go to somebody else. So the way that we manage the children in the system is also potentially impediment to developing those longer term trusting relationships between case workers and also individual children as well.
But there's risk also to the service system itself, which needs to be understood, and that's in part, and I won't go on any further with this, but one of the issues seems to me, you have a risk to the individual child and or carer or family, but you also have a risk to the system.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether or not part of the problem we've had through the proceduralisation in this area is an over-concern of risk to institution at the expense of risk to child. But I think that's probably a topic for another day. But I will conclude with just one question. In the early work in the 2000s, it showed that in relation to relationships with children, there appeared to be, from the view of the children, a better relationship within NGOs than with governments, largely due to the fact of the turnover within the agency, not outside of the agency, with staff. In other words, the staff were never around long enough to establish relationships. In NGOs where there's a flatter structure, a less careerist structure, that was less likely to be the case, and more longer-term relationships were established. Is that still the evidence or the perception, or is the difference between the two parts of the sector less obvious these days? Or is there no evidence of that?
One of the additional ingredients to that conversation is the dilemma that statutory workers face in regards to building relationships with people, that sometimes they've had to involve themselves in very difficult decisions. Sometimes they're seen as the person who's caused me to be in care. So they have to balance, the welfare tag, if you like, that's putting it clumsily, but that sort of notion that you are the authority or the power that's caused this. And that does get in the way sometimes, particularly with our older children, in terms of the strength of the relationship that can be viably formed when you're trying to navigate both your statutory authority and also your construction around building a therapeutic relationship. NGOs are better positioned because they don't have that sort of legacy. It's how we optimise that is probably the critical point, rather than necessarily trying to go around it.
Commissioner, I'm not aware of current research on that, but I guess I would reflect in Victoria we have a very strong tradition of the involvement of the non-government sector in caring for children. So I think that kind of that leads probably to a very well-developed and sophisticated level of skill in that sector, which possibly contributes to what you're observing.
Just in New South Wales, given you're in the moment of another major transformation?
Yes. Well, we're still focusing on transitioning out of home care to the non-government sector, so we're not seeking to build that within our own capability. We're certainly trying to build within our area the child protection caseworkers having strong relationships with children and their families that they're seeking to work with in order for the family to be able to keep children safe, and if they need to remove them, then they would more likely begin to have a relation, the children and the families, we begin to have a relationship with a non-government organisation, caseworker in that case. One of the things as a funder, FACS has done is to fund the AQUA around what we call a best practice unit. So whilst we think inside FACS itself we have an Office of Senior Practitioner, we want to seek to help non-government agencies as well, large or small, to do the same kind of thing, to have a very strong focus on relationship-based practice.
Thank you.
Ms. Work, you referred to work on looking at the children who come into care to see whether they're the right children who should be in care. Now, as I understand the data, New South Wales has almost double the number of children coming into care per 1,000 population than Victoria. Can you shed any light on that?
Our numbers from certainly about 2002, but really peaked at around 2006. It's a little bit difficult because of how we count, what out-of-home care is. So many of the growth in out-of-home care were actually children who were coming through what we call the supported care area. So they weren't necessarily coming in through the children's court, if you like, in that sense, because of our removals. They were coming in because other family members may well have come from the family court, sought to receive the support, the financial support and resource support from the organisation. The removal rate, if you like, of new entries into care, first-time entries into care, has not been significantly growing in the last couple of years, certainly since about 2010. So I know that there's a sense about the, huge volume of children coming into care, but in actual fact the removal rate is about 1%, or I think it might have been 0.7%. It is still high. It's about 1% of the population. Now, of course, we don't know whether it should be 0.8 or 1.2 in terms of what is the right group there. But what we do know is that we should not bring children into care if their families are able to change. And we do know that we do need to give much more effort to focusing on that, and that's when we talk about the right children coming into care, it's about that, not that there's a particular type of child, but that at a very early age we're making decisions that think about this child's need for permanency.
Thank you. I have nothing further
on that topic.
That's the end of the topic for topic one.
Thank you.
There are a number of NGOs who are to give evidence on topic one.
Yes.
But in terms of this panel for topic one, I have no further questions.
All right, thank you. Just a couple of matters then before we allow this panel to take its leave. Can I start with you, Ms Hare, just to take you back to some evidence you gave with respect to the residential therapeutic model? You recall talking to us about that. And your evidence was that the evaluation with respect to that model was that it made, I think these were your words, it made a significant difference to the children. Can I ask you to firstly explain what the significant difference was?
Certainly, Commissioner. I'll try to. I have some notes on this, which I'll try to find. But perhaps at a high level, the findings were that the children's placements were much more stable. That their educational, emotional, and physical outcomes.
Just to interrupt you. What does stable mean?
Sorry.
Does it mean that the children actually stayed in the placements?
Yes. So
didn't abscond.
One of the things that we find with children who are in residential care is that they've usually experienced a number of what we call placement breakdowns. So where they've been perhaps in a home-based care situation, and in some cases we have children who come into residential care who've had 8, 10, 12 kinship or foster care placements which have broken down and then they come to residential care. And that's usually because the children have got such complex and multiple needs, and it's for some home-based carers it's difficult to address those. So our policy approach is that residential care should be a therapeutic, trauma-informed environment for those most complex children who need, who cannot be supported in a home-based environment, and the therapeutic model was designed to support those children. So one of the criteria was that the placement, that their stability in the place that they're living, in the residential home, with the staff, with that environment, is stable, that they're not constantly moving and shifting and needing to have their care changed. So that's a significant outcome of it. The other elements were around the children's social, emotional, physical and educational outcomes, and all of those generally improved. There's much more detail that I could provide to you perhaps through the document if you would like, Commissioner, but that's the broad outcome.
All right, thank you. Thank you for that. Mr. Harrison, can I ask you, with respect to the evidence that you've given about the evaluation, if I've understood this correctly, the evaluation done by KPMG of the out-of-home care program, the question that you were answering was in relation to education and awareness for children and young people with respect to enhancing their ability to make disclosures. And I understood that that was an answer you were giving in the context of being able to make disclosures potentially about keeping themselves safe, and in particular in this context, disclosures about a sense of either risk or actuality of sexual abuse.
So just to clarify, please, it's a whole of school curriculum.
I understand. Yes, that's what I understood.
Was I guess the proposition I was strongly putting forward was that because it's designed and delivered from approximately 5 years of age continuously through till 17 or 18 years of age, that those children in the care of the minister are on some form of guardianship order,
yes,
would generally be accessing the school environment from the age of 5, and hence children in out-of-home care would also be captured by this curriculum delivery process, as well as all other children as well. So I guess it has multiple purposes, but specifically also picks up those children who will be in out-of-home care environments.
So that's what I wanted to clarify with you, that KPMG evaluation did pick up the children in out-of-home care?
No, I don't believe it specifically had a terms of reference to examine the impact on children who were currently under a guardianship order at the time of the evaluation. I don't think it did. But certainly it's something that we could look at designing into the review process in 2016.
Because unfortunately, so often the children in out-of-home care very early in their schooling will become disconnected from school.
Yes, that's right.
So that evaluating children in the general school population won't necessarily target evaluating the children's ability to disclose in the general school population won't necessarily pick up this group. Would you accept that?
I would suggest, though, that it's got a high propensity and a high degree of opportunity, particularly for those children that are around about 5, 6, 7, 8 years of age. Attendance figures for guardianship children is comparable to those of mainstream children, particularly in the younger years. It obviously declines. Mm. So the program is specifically designed to start to capture all children and focus on keeping children safe from 5 years of age onwards, right through to 17 or 18 years of age. So because of comparable attendance rates at school for young children, it certainly would pick up those children under some form of guardianship order.
Thank you. Thanks, Ms Furness. We might take the mid-morning break now, and then we're going to change the panel as I understand.
Thank you.
So we'll take a 20-minute break now. Thank you.
All stand.